Ask you this.
If not, and we chase 2,100 million people into the slums of the towns, we will create, on a scale unheard of, mass migration. What we saw in Rwanda of 2 million people will be nothing. So as to satisfy an economic doctrine, a piece of economic thinking, which, by the way, started in 1819 and was based on totally different ideas, which we would be creating 2 billion refugees. We would be creating mass waves of migration which none of us could control. We would be destroying the towns which are already largely destroyed. Look at Rio, look at Mexico, look at our own towns. And we're doing this for economic dogma because we've got to get it done by the end of December. We can't wait another year or two to see the result. Otherwise, some political gimmick like fast track will go out of the way. What is this nonsense? Everything is based in our modern society on improving an economic index. How do we get greater economic growth? How do we grow GNP? And the result is we are destroying the stability of our societies because we are worshipping the wrong God, economic index.
And the God we should worship is
that the economy, like everything else, is a tool which should be submitted, should be subject to the true and fundamental requirements of society. A huge need for capital investment to redo your infrastructure, so to create all the problems you know about. And this is the time when the capital is moving out massively to the third world.
You got to let me move on.
But what you've got, let me just make it clear, the people who are going to lose here in the developed countries are not people like me or you. They're going to be the people who lose their jobs out there. It is the poor in the rich countries who are going to be subsidizing the rich in the poor countries throughout the world.
With all of the destabilizing impact that it will have.
And you've seen it. But it's the greatest single disaster. It's much more disastrous than any war we've had. On top of that, you're breaking families. You're uprooting them. You're throwing them into the slums. Breakdown of families, drugs, crime, all those problems which we all know are the fundament of a problem, but they're symptoms of something.
By about 1996, they want to change the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which, if you remember, was one of those rules-based global order things. They want to change it to something called the WTO, the World Trade Organization. This was, again, a great idea. Let's globalize, let's liberalize markets, let us all trade with each other with no tariffs. Obviously, no tariffs doesn't actually exist because everybody still imposes tariffs on each other. Mm-hmm. But they start this idea, and now, once you make that agreement, the worker in America, who's already in excess supply, is now competing against the global worker, who's cheaper, because America is the richest society in the world. Yeah. So you've now double fucked everybody. And they're triple fucked because in the 80s comes the rise of the silicon chip in the computer, and Moore's law explodes and technology starts replacing jobs at every level. So these poor baby boomers who are now up to here in debt by the mid-90s are now facing a globalized workforce of cheaper, more effective, more productive labor, the rise of technology, and a debt burden, all at the same time. You have no understanding what you're about to do to your own populace. He said, you're creating an ability and all the incentives to offshore your entire manufacturing industry. Right. And what's going to happen is the rich are going to get super rich because they're going to have the lowest cost of wages in the world to manufacture goods that they sell to your population in the US and Europe. And your wages are never going up again. And this is going to lead to populism, and it's going to lead to massive societal disrupt. And you've broken the social contract. Do not do this.
When you manufacture something, anything, this table,
right,
you have a value added. The value added is when you take the raw materials and you manufacture a product. Mm-hmm. The value you add is known as value added. And that is shared between capital and labor. And the whole division, the sharing of that, has been the subject of massive debates for generations. How much should go to capital? How much should go to labor? You've had strikes, you've had lockouts, you've had political debates. all of a sudden, by creating a global marketplace for labor, but by creating circumstances where people are making the same product with the same technology and the same capital, and the only variant is cost of labor, you are shattering the way you share the value added. And that means that you are destroying the basis on which we've been able to create an equilibrium and have a stable society.
Okay, but let me just take this argument. This is the same thing we've heard about protectionism every time it comes up in the American Congress, is it not? Same arguments are made.
No.
Not?
No, absolutely not. I am entirely for free enterprise. I am for free markets. I believe that you
I'm waiting for the but.
Well, I'm giving you the but. I'm not for the destruction of one's society. Can you explain, what is the purpose of an economy in your view?
I know this is a point that you feel very strongly about. It has many purposes, in fact, to play a role in a society in terms of creating jobs, in terms of playing a positive force, in terms of giving people an opportunity to serve, to take care of their family, giving people an opportunity to participate in their society.
In other words, the economy is there to serve the fundamental needs of society.
Yes.
Which are prosperity.
Yes.
Which are stability.
Yes.
And which are contentment.
Do you agree with that or not?
That is the basis. And that's the basis of my thinking.
Right.
And what I'm saying at this stage is that if, purely for an economic doctrine, you have a situation whereby the economy grows, but you create poverty, unemployment, and you destabilize the society, you're in trouble. Look what's happened in the last 50 years. You see, people are not willing to look at fundamentals. When I was a boy, we were taught that irreversibly we were moving towards progress.
Yes.
That material wealth, material prosperity would solve our problems, would improve our way of life, and improve our civilization. We were taught that. And we achieved the creation of material prosperity in a way which we would never have dreamt of. We made the economy grow 400%, incredibly. And what have we done? We've destabilized our society. We've increased unemployment massively. We've totally destabilized our cities. We've uprooted our countryside. We've increased crime. Every single valid criterion for a stable society has become negative. Therefore, something must be wrong. And what has become wrong is that instead of the economy being there to serve us, we are there adoring, serving economic industries.
All right. Let me then that all the automobile companies in America are going to move their manufacturing facilities to Mexico?
They've certainly, most of them, increased their production in Mexico. But I'll tell you, in the last 2 or 3 months, IBM, Boeing, Advanced Microsystems have all announced movement offshore, all of certain parts of their manufacturing. And therefore, this is not just textile workers. It's not just furniture workers. It's not just people
where protectionism and tariffs have been most prevalent in the American economy.
Possibly, but what I'm saying is this attacks skilled labor as well as traditional labor.
Well, that's one of the arguments made. I want to move to tactics, but one of the arguments made is that you are talking about essentially unskilled labor.
I'm not.
And that the labor force of the future has to do with technology, and it has to do with the service industry, and that these 4 billion people you're talking about are not prepared to do those jobs which will fuel a modern economy around the world.
The facts are just demonstrate the opposite.
All right, well, let me interrupt you. Let me interrupt you.
I've got to answer you.
All right, because I want to get to tactics.
It is just the facts are the opposite. Firstly, it started with the textiles and the shoes and all the rest of it. Right. And those industries were decimated. And we lost millions of employments and people employed. Secondly, it was followed by the high-tech industries. And as I say, in the last few months, you've had those. Thirdly, the service industries.
Yeah.
The service industries, these are facts. The service industries are also moving offshore. There are satellites up there. If you take Swissair has moved part of its back office into Bombay. Why? Because they can communicate through the satellite and reduce their costs by 95%.
All right, joining me, I want you to do this. because you have made this argument before and you testified before Senator Pollin's committee, the Commerce Committee of the Senate. Joining me now is the chairman of the President's Council on Economic Advisors. Laura Tyson, you have heard this argument made by Sir James Goldsmith. He is a man who's been frequently right in his understanding of the economy and how business works, and he has a frontline, hands-on experience. Where is he wrong in your judgment and the judgment of the Clinton administration?
Well, I think that the evidence speaks for itself. We have an economy right now which is rapidly growing, which has generated 5 million jobs. There are many high-wage, high-quality jobs that have been generated. This is an economy which is depending in part on exports. We know that $1 billion of exports translates into about 17,000 American jobs. We know that those jobs pay higher than average wages in America. We also know, incidentally, from a whole series of studies, that foreign direct investment by American firms actually helps create jobs in America, because when American firms actually make investments abroad and reduce their costs, they're more competitive globally. What does that mean? It actually means they can employ more people in the United States. American companies in general do not move production abroad in order to find total alternatives for production here. They tend to complement their production base here with production bases other places.
Firstly, exports. The facts are in there again. You've got the second worst year in American history in balance of trade. $150 billion you're aiming at an trade deficit. So you're importing infinitely more than you're exporting. And if that is, I can't remember how many jobs you said it was per $1 billion, that's a hell of a lot of lost jobs. Secondly, the new jobs being created are largely part-time and very much in lower salaries before you even had the competition of NAFTA. And before you, of course, long before the Uruguay round, which I hope will never come about, you've already had a very substantial increase in hourly and weekly earnings. And as for lower prices for imported goods, how does it work? What happens is people transfer their production offshore, they import their products and sell them just below the level of the locally produced product. And that way, they manage to really put the local company out of business. That's what's been happening throughout Europe.
Well, the problem with that argument is that there are just a number of problems with that argument. The facts are just not right. First of all, just on the basis of the question of what jobs are being created in the United States right now, it is the case, if you just look in the 10 months of this year, exactly the 10 months when you're saying our trade imbalance did worsen, and it did worsen. In those 10 months, this economy created more high-quality jobs, that is above average earnings jobs, than in the previous 5 years combined. There is no...
A $500 million volume business. You're chief executive of a business with $500 million of volume. By moving offshore, you're going to save $100 million a year. And by staying here, you're going to have to compete with people who are saving that $100 million.
What you were saying is absolutely correct. There are
some... Thank you. That's all that...
But it bears no relationship to the issue of whether trade liberalization is beneficial or not. It is true that for some American companies, where wage costs are a significant fraction of what they produce, of the cost of their production, and where it doesn't matter, given what they produce, whether they're near...
So that you can manufacture anywhere in the world to sell anywhere in the world.
But
now,
let him finish and then come back.
Why did this not happen before?
Okay.
Because if you manufactured abroad before, you couldn't import back without a cost. Now what you're doing is you are saying move offshore, continue to move offshore as you've been doing up to now, according to you, and I agree with you, and you can re-import into the States the products that you manufacture. And the result is that you will obliterate earnings and employment in the States.
First of all...
So there's this question. What is fundamentally wrong?
You see, because obviously Europe and America are extremely similar. Very similar problems: development of slums, breakdown of families, drugs, crime. All those problems which we all know are the fundament of a problem, but they're symptoms of something. They didn't come about on their own. They're symptoms of a basic disease. You take GATT, you'd think that everybody in the third world would say, this is phenomenal. We're going to be able to become the manufacturing base for the first world. We're going to be able to suck in their jobs, export products to them, and we're going to benefit. But in fact, 1 million people went out in India to campaign, to protest against GATT in the streets, led by a remarkable woman called Mrs. Shiva, Professor Shiva, remarkable woman, Sandana Shiva. Now, they look around and they see the West and they see the mess we've made with economic growth. They see that we've, as I said before, uprooted the countryside, bloated the towns, destabilized the towns, and created terrible, terrible chaos for ourselves. And they want to avoid it. And they say that GATT, the purpose of which is to create what is known today as efficient agriculture and to impose it worldwide. Now let me just give you one aspect of GATT on the third world. The idea of GATT is that the efficiency of agriculture throughout the world should reach the most efficient. That sounds logical, to produce the most amount of food for the least cost. But what does that really mean? An economist will say that's obvious, the most amount of food for the least cost. But what is cost? When you intensify agriculture and you reduce the number of people on the land, what happens to those people? They're chased into the towns. They lose their job in the land. If they go into the towns, there's no jobs. There's no infrastructure. The social costs of those people, the financial cost of the infrastructure, has to be added to the cost of producing food if you want to have the real cost of food.
I understand your
On
argument.
top of that, that's just economics, and economics should not be the whole argument. On top of that, you're breaking families, you're uprooting them, you're throwing them into the slums. In the world today, there are 3,100 million people still living in rural communities, 3.1 billion.
Right.
If GATT succeeds and we're able to impose modern methods of agriculture worldwide so as to bring them to the levels, say, of Canada or Australia, what would happen? 2,000 million people out of those 3,100 million people, straight arithmetic calculation, would be uprooted from the land and chased into the towns. Now, throughout the world,
With all of the destabilizing impact that it will
and
have.
you've seen
But
it.
here's my
But it's
point.
the greatest single disaster. It's much more disaster, great more disastrous than any
So
war
what's
we've
your-
had. If not, and we chase 2,100 million people into the slums of the towns, we will create, on a scale unheard of, mass migration. What we saw in Rwanda of 2 million people will be nothing. So as to satisfy an economic doctrine, a piece of economic thinking which, by the way, started in 1819 and was based on totally different ideas, which was Mr. Ricardo's ideas, we would be creating 2 billion refugees. We would be creating mass waves of migration which none of us could control. We would be destroying the towns which are already largely destroyed. Look at Rio, look at Mexico, look at our own towns. And we're doing this for economic dogma because we've got to get it done by the end of December. We can't wait another year or two to see the result. Otherwise, some political gimmick like fast track will go out of the way. What is this nonsense? Everything is based in our modern society on improving an economic index. How do we get greater economic growth? How do we grow GNP? And the result is we are destroying the stability of our societies because we are worshipping the wrong God, economic index.
And the God we should worship is
that the economy, like everything else, is a tool which should be submitted, should be subject to the true and fundamental requirements of society. Because you've got to understand what is happening. This is the establishment against the rest of society. What is happening in France today, for instance, 30% of the population is for GATT, 70% against it. But who are the 70%? They're the ordinary people. Who are the 30%? They're basically big business whose dream, and I've been in big business, and I'm for business, as long as it doesn't devour society, as long as it doesn't totally destroy things. So I'm for profits, for free markets, and I'm a capitalist, and I'm perfectly proud of having been successful. But let me make it clear that we have a conflict of interest, and what is happening is that big business loves the idea of total access to unlimited giveaway labor, which is what it's going to have. And therefore, in a community like France, where we have succeeded in getting the issue out, in getting it discussed and understood, 70% are now against it.
But when you strip away everything, what you were saying, I mean, and I've read this book, what you were saying is that you're going to see, if GATT passes, you're going to see labor. Jobs will be lost in the industrialized world because of the fact that companies in the search of the cheapest labor will move their manufacturing operations.
And you know who's going to
to
make
the
money over
underdeveloped
there?
world.
You know who's going to make money
Who's
over
going
there?
to make money over there?
I'll tell you who's going to make money over there. In every developing nation, you have the same pattern. You have a handful of people who control everything.
The oligarchy
And
that
the
controls an
oligarchies
undeveloped.
everywhere,
All right, I gotta
and
move
everyone.
on. You got to
All
let me move
but
on.
what you've got, let me just make it clear: the people who are going to lose here in the developed countries are not people like me or you. They're going to be the people who lose their jobs out there. It is the poor in the rich countries who are going to be subsidizing the rich in the poor countries. It is the most extraordinary.
You will grant me that there are a lot of people. Laura Tyson is one, and the President of the United States is other, and Newt Gingrich, the new Speaker of the House in the United States Congress, and a number of businessmen disagree with you.
Of course.
Reasonable people are disagreeing over the impact of this
Of
treaty.
course.
So this question for you.
Yeah.
If, in fact, the European Parliament, of which you are a member, adopts GATT, are you going to resign from that Parliament?
It's a good question. The point is, I know we're going to vote on the 14th. And my part, the reason why I'm in politics is to fight against this. GATT is the principal reason why I started a political party, why we stood for elections and put a whole slate in June, why we had a success, by the way, because the people were in favor of it, not the elites, and we're in the parliament to fight it. Now, what is going to happen? It'll pass in Europe if it passes in America. Because the European Parliament is a false, a pseudo-democratic institution. It's no more than democratic disguise for the Commission. The idea that it's a democracy is absurd. It's already fixed by the two main parties who determine it, and that is the Christian Democrats and the Socialists.
Right.
So it's going to pass whatever we do. The only thing that we can fight for is the right for people to hold a referendum, which is an old European tradition. And that is that it be placed before the people who are given a right to vote on the single most important economic change in their lifetimes. And we will do everything, including demonstrations in the streets and bringing the people into the streets, not to adopt our plan, not to reject GATT, because that would be people imposing through the streets some political action, but to have the right to vote. What we will insist upon is the right for the people to vote on the single most important economic act that has affected their careers and their children's careers and thereafter. And it is unbelievable that here in the United States, this great country, the leader of the world, because what you decide here will determine the others, that there's been practically no debate when you had this huge debate on NAFTA, which was a pimple. It is going through because politicians think, well, why not give a good deal to Clinton on this? It's an easy one. There's no debate about it. Business likes it. Business, no doubt, will subsidize things. Business adores it. That's why it's going through. It is a fix, as it is in Europe. It's a business political
fix. It's not
fix.
that simple, in fact, because there are a number of people who, not just because business is in favor of, there are a lot of people here, of both Democrats and Republicans.
That's nonpartisan. I agree.
Who
I agree.
believe in the concept also of free trade. Now, they may have a different judgment about the consequences of free trade, but in the principle of free trade, they agree.
Look, that is true. Of course, they're sincere people.
Okay.
And of that there's absolutely
It's not
no
that
doubt.
they're tools of business and all that.
Oh, but there's a lot. All I can tell you is, and let me speak from Europe,
All
the
right.
European thing. I don't know America well enough to be able to talk about it, but in the political scene. But in Europe, the position is extremely clear. Business and politics, the ruling machinery of government and economic power in Europe are imposing this without a vote and trying to stifle the debate. Now, maybe it's not the case here. All I know is there hasn't been a debate on the single most important economic act of your lifetime.
Well, I tell you what.
But I also believe that you cannot enrich a country by impoverishing its people. I do not believe that the health of an economy is measured by the profitability of its corporations. I believe profits are important, but even more important is the health of the population in terms of participation. That you can't just have tax cuts. You've got to have an overall idea. You've got a lot of problems in this country, as we all have. You've got slums, you've got poor infrastructure.
We've got too many young people not married, having babies, and all
no,
kinds
but
of
what I'm talking about is things that are going to, that where money is involved. You're talking tax, and therefore I'm thinking in terms of money here as opposed to deeper things. And you've got a huge need for capital investment to redo your infrastructure, so to create all the problems you know about. And this is the time when the capital is moving out massively to the third world. Now let me tell you something. People who say you have to go and build the infrastructure of the third world, I would recommend to you that you build the infrastructure right here where you need it. When you drive through parts of the United States, and I'm saying this.
But are you saying that to be a good citizen, or as a businessman, are you saying that there is as much return on building, using your capital in the United States as there is in using your capital in Asia?
You are putting your finger on the problem. This is exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that the politicians, unthinkingly, have created a situation, a structure, whereby responsible businessmen, patriotic and decent businessmen, are forced to invest offshore or go bankrupt because labor is so much cheaper. And therefore the structure is one whereby you are taking responsible people and forcing them offshore, whereas you should not be forcing them offshore. You should be ensuring that that investment stays here. You have the need for that investment as we have in Europe. You've got so much to do and you're thinking about doing it elsewhere. You've got a responsibility right here. You're supposed to be an example to the world. Your infrastructure is not an example.
We're also the leader of the world, too.
You are, yes.
Okay, and there comes responsibilities
to be an
serving
example.
that role.
To be an example rather than to impose your views.